If the Florida housing market is crashing, why did Tampa home prices just rise 4.3% year over year in March 2026? Why did Jacksonville just move back to a balanced 4.5 months of supply after spending most of 2025 in buyer territory? Why did Orlando record positive price growth for the second consecutive quarter? And why is Ocala still the #1 inbound migration city in the entire United States for the third straight year? These are not questions the crash narrative can answer, because the crash narrative is not describing the Florida housing market. It is describing one specific corner of Florida that is genuinely in a post-pandemic correction, and it is applying that correction to an entire state as if Florida is a single market, when the data has been telling us for 3 years that it is not. My name is David Cole. I am the editor-in-chief of Housing Intel. This channel exists because the real estate industry has a financial interest in telling you things are fine. We do not. But this channel also exists to tell you when the fear narrative is just as wrong as the spin narrative. And right now, both are wrong about Florida simultaneously. Let us get into what the data actually shows. The first thing you need to understand is that 15 of the 20 largest home price declines in the entire United States between January 2025 and January 2026 were in Florida, according to Zillow data analyzed by HousingWire. That is a real number, it is accurate, and it is the foundation of the crash narrative. But what that number does not tell you, because headlines never tell you the second half of the story, is that every one of those 15 markets is in Southwest Florida. Punta Gorda, Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Northport, Sarasota. The same geographic cluster that experienced the most extreme pandemic-era price surge in the state, the same markets that were hit by Hurricane Ian in 2022, the same markets carrying the heaviest insurance burden per dollar of home value in Florida. These are not representative of the Florida housing market. They are the weakest corner of the weakest Sunbelt state in this correction cycle, and the national media is treating them as if they are the statewide story. Here is the correction data for Southwest Florida in its complete form. Punta Gorda is down 25.3% from its July 2022 peak, according to ResiClub Analytics, which has tracked this market rigorously through the full cycle. Cape Coral and Fort Myers are down 18.8% from peak. Northport and Sarasota are down 17.4%. Those are material corrections. The ResiClub analysis acknowledges them fully as the second largest correction of any U.S. metro area this cycle, behind only Austin at 27.3%. But here is the number that the crash narrative never includes. A home in Venice in the Northport Sarasota metro that was purchased in 2023 for $565,000 and ultimately sold in December 2025 for $455,000, down 19.5%, was still 38.7% above the price the same property sold for in 2017. The correction is real. The crash framing is false. A buyer who paid pandemic prices is sitting on a loss. A buyer who bought before the boom is still sitting on significant appreciation. These are not the same situation, and they should not be described in the same language. The second piece of data is the correction trajectory itself. ResiClub Analytics published analysis in late April 2026 showing that the intensity of Florida's price correction has been easing for 7 consecutive months. Some Florida metros, specifically in the Panhandle and northern Florida, have turned positive on a seasonally adjusted month-over-month basis. Even the most distressed Southwest Florida markets, Punta Gorda and Cape Coral, are now showing smaller monthly declines than they were 7 months ago. Active inventory in some Southwest Florida submarkets has begun declining year over year for the first time since the correction started. Builders in the region are no longer starting speculative construction and are focused on absorbing the standing inventory they built during the boom. The Southwest Florida correction is not over, but the data says its worst phase is behind it. Before we continue, drop a comment below. If you own property in Florida right now, which market are you in? And what are you actually seeing on the ground relative to what the national coverage is saying? Your data matters here. The gap between what the headlines say and what homeowners are experiencing is one of the most important stories Housing Intel can tell. And if you know a Florida homeowner who is making a sell decision right now based on crash headlines, share this video with them first. The third piece of data covers the markets the crash narrative has erased from the conversation entirely. Tampa recorded a median home price of $433,000 in March 2026, up 4.3% year over year, according to Redfin. That is above the national median of $417,000. The Tampa housing market is at 1% above the national median. It spent the better part of 2025 working through elevated inventory and now carries 3.8 months of supply, which is below the equilibrium threshold that defines a balanced market, according to local market reporting. Jacksonville and the surrounding metro, which we covered in depth in video 1 of this series, are at 4.5 months of supply, with prices essentially flat year over year, which in a market that was genuinely oversupplied in 2024 is a signal of stabilization, not collapse. Orlando recorded a median of $410,000 in March 2026, up 1.2% year over year, with homes spending 54 days on the market, essentially unchanged from the prior year. These three major metros, which together represent tens of millions of people and a large share of Florida's total housing transaction volume, are not in a crash. They are in a normalization. The fourth piece of data is the one that requires the most careful framing for this audience, because it is the data point that the real estate industry uses to minimize the Southwest Florida correction, and it should not be used that way. Florida home prices as measured by Zillow are down 4.3% statewide over the past year. Florida home prices as measured by Florida realtors for single-family homes in February 2026 are down 0.7% year over year, with the statewide median at $412,000. These numbers do not describe a crash. They describe a modest statewide correction that masks extreme regional variation. The statewide average is being dragged down by Southwest Florida's deep correction and being partially offset by stability and growth in the central and northern markets. Neither number tells you what your specific market is doing. And in a state as geographically diverse as Florida, the statewide number is close to useless for any individual decision. The fifth and final piece of data is the honest assessment of where each region stands in the correction cycle as of May 2026, and what that means for buyers, sellers, and current owners. In Southwest Florida, the correction is still in progress, but decelerating. The markets that were most overvalued, Punta Gorda, at 57.8% overvaluation per Moody's Analytics at the peak, are now estimated at 9% overvaluation by that same model, meaning most of the mean reversion has already happened. A buyer entering Cape Coral or Punta Gorda today is entering a market that is dramatically cheaper than the 2022 peak, but is showing early signs that the most aggressive selling pressure has passed. The risk for that buyer is not that prices fall another 25%. The risk is that insurance costs continue to escalate and suppress the market's ability to recover regardless of price. In Tampa, Jacksonville, and Orlando, the data says these markets have largely absorbed the post-pandemic correction and are back to behaving like functional housing markets. Buyers in these markets have more leverage than they did in 2022, but they are not in distress territory. The negotiating window is open, but not as wide as it was in 2024. In Northeast and North Central Florida, the picture is more nuanced. St. Johns County is still carrying a median above $500,000 with all the affordability. Compression that implies Marion County is still the #1 U-Haul growth city in the country and carrying migration pressure that is providing a floor under prices even as the broader Florida market softens. And the interior counties we covered in videos 4 through 6, the Levy, Putnam, Citrus, Columbia Corridor, are the markets where the correction dynamic is essentially absent, because these markets never experienced a significant pandemic surge to correct from. Here is the complete picture that 7 reports have built over this series. The Florida housing market in 2026 is not crashing. It is not fine. It is 5 separate stories running simultaneously in the same state. Southwest Florida is in a real, material, data-confirmed correction that is probably past its worst phase, but is still working through the consequences of pandemic overpricing and Hurricane Ian. Tampa, Jacksonville, and Orlando are stable and functioning. Northeast Florida is experiencing demand pressure from migration that the affordability data says is increasingly unsustainable at the top end. North Central Florida is being quietly captured by a migration cascade that has already run for 3 years and shows no sign of stopping. And the interior counties along the Nature Coast and Big Bend corridor are the last places in the state where the price-to-income ratio still makes sense for a buyer on a normal budget. The media needs a single Florida headline. The data does not cooperate with that format. If you have been watching this channel through all 7 of these reports, you now have the full picture that no single news story, no single real estate agent, and no single statewide statistic can give you. Use it accordingly. Housing Intel publishes 3 reports every week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Every one of them is built on verified data, not speculation, not opinion, not real estate industry talking points. Subscribe if you want the full picture, and share this video if someone you care about needs to hear it. We will be back with more.